What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Play It Out podcast, a competitive-focused Age of Sigmar podcast. My name is Kyle, aka Creator Gator, and I am here with my friend James. James, how are you doing today?
Fine, my dude. I'm AOS deprived currently.
I know. It came out in August, right? It was at the end of July?
Late July, yeah.
Late July. And
26th, I think.
I've gotten a few games in, but not as many as I want. And I need to get back into the habit of getting like one solid game in a week. But it's just hard. The summer is busy.
Summer biddy time.
But we have a tournament coming up at the end of September. So part of that process is helping me learn. And one of the best ways that I can learn is to talk about it and to help other people learn while I'm also learning.
Yes.
So
talking and learning.
So today what we're going to be covering is building off of the last two episodes that we did. If you haven't seen those, go check them out. We talked about the battle plans for this season, and we talked about the battle tactics for this season, which are obviously very important when we're covering today's topic, which is deployment. And the title of this video, it's a little clickbaity, but it's how to win.
If you're here, you're baited.
You already got baited. You're already in.
You're welcome.
The title is Win Games Before Round 1, How to Deployment Phase. So we're going to be talking about all of the different things that you have to be thinking of when you're going through that deployment phase section and where you kind of want to put your stuff and all of the things that need to be going through your brain when you're setting up your little toy soldiers.
Your little dudes you want to score points with. Yeah, literally, like the last few podcasts we scored how to, like, what the missions are, how to score primary, and then how to score secondary. And this is more of like an applications episode.
100%. And we definitely could sit down and go like battle plan by battle plan and like what we're thinking, but it's much more useful to talk about generalizations when it comes to that and sort of rules of thumb and what to keep in mind when you're going in. We're just going to hop right into it. And like the first thing that I kind of want everyone to remember is AOS is a movement game with combat mechanics. Combat only exists to deny your opponent the ability to score and get battle tactics.
Yeah, it's to remove things on the board that can't stand on circles.
Yep, 100%. And like there's one battle tactic that is you have to like pick it and kill it. You know what I mean? That is to like kill something in your enemy's general's regiment, right? Everything else is just fight.
Yeah, for universal battle tactics.
True.
Yeah.
Like obviously other like chaos is much more like fight, kill, destruction.
kill.
But yeah, no. It's definitely one of those things to think about when you're thinking about deployment specifically, because there's going to be a lot of times where you want to set up and just like yeet your whole army into the enemy. Yeah. And even though that's like very tempting, it's something that isn't going to score you points and might actually hurt you more than help you, because you're going to be putting yourself into a bad position.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to think about the deployment phase. I think at least the first one I think we can talk about is understanding like how your battle tactics are going to play into that, right? Because like you dropping a battle tactic in this edition is massive, because a lot of times it's like instead of scoring in the previous edition, it was 2 points for a battle tactic. Now it's 4, right? And that's the ratio is the same to primary than it was, but a lot of the missions have like very finicky ways to get your like full 6 points. So that 4 points feels a lot more impactful, you know? So like turn 1 IMO, like when I'm looking at a battlefield, like I'm really thinking about like, regardless of going first or second, I'm deploying to score one of these 3 battle tactics, right?
Yep.
It's take the flanks, seize the center, and take their land, right? Like that's it, you know, like, because that's something that like I can, if my opponent chooses to seize the center, I can try to take the flanks. If my opponent takes the flanks, I can try to seize the center, you know what I mean? But maybe they set up like a counter charge or something like that. Like there's a lot of play because of the reactivity of the game now, right? So you have to understand, like, you know, if someone's got like enough CP to have a counter charge in the bank, or you know, what have you, you know, because they're conditional, right? Like if you charge into the center when I'm doing seize the center, I can't score the battle tactic anymore unless I kill the unit that charged me, right? Yeah. So it's not the same thing on take their flanks, and the take their land is a really good battle tactic, right? But the biggest problem with doing that turn 1 is it's one of those ones that in the later parts of the game, when you have fewer and fewer models to go and touch things and score battle like tactics, it's really easy to just stand next to a piece of terrain and be like, okay, at least for this turn, I'm covered. You know what I mean? Like it's like an insurance policy. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have to burn that one turn one, it's really important not to. Right. So it's kind of this like my at least first deployment check is the like, hey, did you deploy? Like, did my opponent deploy to take the flanks or seize the center? Because I need to do the opposite, you know?
Yeah. Or the, and we talked about it a little bit before, but the fight with 2 units and not have anything die.
Yeah, that's also great.
If you're going second, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Which if you won the drop game, you probably are. Yes. So if they put something in the center, you can put 2 units into it. And even if the first unit kills it, because of how fight works in this edition, they would still both technically be able to fight, and then you get your battle tactic.
Yeah.
You fought with 2 units and nothing died, obviously, because their unit that's in combat has died or extremely weak at this point. So that's a great turn 1, but you're going second battle tactic. But yeah, the biggest thing is like, I guess the deployment phase kind of starts with list building, because if you want to seize the center or if you want to take the flanks, seize the center specifically, because that's you're almost always going to be able to do that turn 1.
Yeah,
you have to have units that can get there, and you can only auto run one of them, and even auto running one of them doesn't feel great because you're spending a command point to do it. It's also one of those things that they could counter, like make a 12 or an 11-inch counter charge and just ruin it, you know? So even though it's like probably one of the better options, it's not
for sure. A lot of times it's not for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why like having units in your game, like small, like this is one of the reasons that Night Hunt is doing so well is because 1, there's survivability, but 2, it's a bunch of like high model count, very mobile, like very tough units. You know what I mean? Like, and these like bricks of 10 wounds are flying all over the board, scoring these battle tactics uninterrupted, because it's like super hard to lift them. And every one of them counts as quote unquote 10 on objectives until you start taking ghosts away, you know? So it's important to understand, again, like Night Hunt don't really have to worry about it. They have high movement in the entire army, but like I like in certain lists that I'm building where I'm running a lot of trogs, like I'm moving 6 inches without like running, you know? And that's
which can't, like if you deploy on the line, it gets you to
it's 11 inches away. Yeah.
And not, you know what I mean? If you're deploying 9 inches, like 9 inches away is your deployment from the middle of the center. 3 inches to get you to seize the center. If you just walk, you can't get there.
I have to run. Exactly. And sometimes I'm not close enough. Like depending on deployments, I'm not necessarily close enough to do that either. Because like there are some deployments where I'm like at half and I'm 11 inches away, right? So it's like if I deploy on the line right at the center, I need to roll a 3-up on run to get there. You know, so it's one of those things that it's still doable, right? But if I'm a smart player, right, and a great way to counterplay that is like, let's say you go second, right, and I go first. I throw 2 little stupid chaff units on the sides. I take their flanks, right? But I know you want to then take the center. I'm throwing a hammer unit like 6 inches away from the center because you don't want to charge it, but I can then countercharge you. You know what I mean? Like in your turn and ruin your battle tactic.
Yeah, that is
because a 4-point swing is huge. You know?
Yeah. 4-point swing is huge, and like we said in the previous battle tactic, you might be grasping at straws and reaching down for like a faction battle tactic, but like a lot of people want to do those 2 on turn 1. If you can stop someone from doing that, it's huge. But yeah, like the list building element is very, very important when you're thinking about this deployment phase, because you got to have a movement person. You got to have like a movement.
Move 8, 9, 10 guy
in your army, or deploy from the sky. You know what I mean? Deploy from the sky. You won't be able to get the flanks, but you can set them up and then have them do it next turn. But it's also important to, like, if those units are there in your list to do that, make sure you put them there to do that. You know what I mean? Like, it might be, you might just kind of like start putting models down and not really be thinking. And that's sort of the whole point of this episode, and what we're trying to get away from is just like plopping things on the board, not really thinking of what they're going to do on turn 1, what they're going to do on turn 2, what they're going to do on turn 3. You know what I mean? So that is like, that's probably the biggest thing that we can say is like put things on the board with an intention to do something,
to score. Like
exactly.
Your whole plan is to score, you know?
And you want like supporting elements to support when your opponent tries to like come over and stop you. You know what I mean? But you got to go and get on those circles, and you got to go and like prepare to get those battle tactics, especially turn 1 and turn 2, because you kind of know where like the enemy has to deploy behind a certain line. So you're going to have like the turn 1 is going to be relatively like, okay, I know what I'm doing. You know what I mean?
The closest they can be is 18 inches away, you know?
Yeah, if you only take away one thing, it's the put things on the board with the intention to do thing like 1 and 2. And then the second thing that I think everyone should start thinking about is threat ranges, both like your threat range, but specifically the enemy threat range, especially if you did win the drop off, you make the opponent go first. And like, you don't want to do that if they can run and charge and then charge 3d6 or something like that, and you didn't screen for it.
Agreed. You need to plan effectively, right? And I think that moves us into kind of like the next section of this, right? Where it's not only understanding just the battle tactics, but it's understanding the opponent's like win cons and like effectivity and threat ranges. You know what I mean? Like we talked about this earlier because we kind of like prepped for the podcast. But one of the things that Kyle brought up earlier was if you see 12 Varangard on the line in front of you and Be'lakor behind them, you know what's happening. You know what I mean? Like you're very aware that one of them is going to charge 3d6. So you need to plan for that, right? Like even if you don't have screens, like if you don't have proper screens in your list, you need to either throw something up there to be speed bump material, or you need to like be far enough back where they're not just going to run at you turn 1. Or, you know, if you're me and I'm Trogs, maybe that's what I want them to do. I want them to charge one of those units into my castle so that I can then just wipe it off the board turn 1, you know?
It's like, it's very obvious, like when someone sets like 10 brutes in front of Kragnos on the line, you know what I mean? You're like, oh yeah, I know what you're doing. You know what I mean?
I've seen this song before.
You got to think about like the enemy spells too, because something that like Fangs of the Bad Moon is something that like
18-inch start range.
You probably don't want to be like in range of that if Skragrott just like runs and then does it. You know what I mean? Like that's something to think about. There's a bunch of other abilities in the game that are like that, where it's like, this person specifically wants to do something to your specific character. Yeah. And you want to make sure that character is away from that ability in some way, shape, or form.
Understanding like key abilities. Again, like it's similar to like League of Legends, right? Because like I never played League of Legends, right? Like growing up. In my adolescence, I played a lot of like first-person shooters, third-person shooters. I kind of got to League later in life, which is a terrible idea.
Yeah, no, I remember there was a moment where you, me, and our other friend that we play a lot of video games with, you guys were like, oh, man, we're bored. We want to play another game. Like, what's another game that we can play, all three of us? And someone suggested League of Legends, and I was 2 years clean at the time. And they were like, let's play League. And I was like, you don't want to go there.
You don't want to do that.
You don't want to go down that path. That's all I'm saying, is it leads down a path. And I'm just saying there were nights where we were up at 2 a.m., 5 losses deep, going, we got to end on a win.
Yeah, 100%. I can tell you confidently, it's like, but yeah, I mean, I can tell you confidently, we've both quit. We're out.
We're out.
I uninstalled it. Regardless, I think like there's an element of the game, especially in Sigmar and skill, like there's a skill expression part of the game and then a game knowledge part of the game, right? If you understand like what every toolbox does, like every army, like you've either played every army in the game or you've played against every army in the game, you kind of understand the core mechanics they're going to throw at you, or the big threat abilities, models, battle scrolls, whatever that they're going to throw at you, then you're much more equipped to kind of like deploy in a way where you're not just going to lose turn 1, because it's very hard for them to just hard win. You know what I mean? I mean, right now Nighthawk has a very good win percentage, but Sigmar does a really good job of like every game's a game, and there's lots of ways to score. So I don't think there's ever a situation where like you lose, like people say I lost deployment, you know what I mean? You can set yourself up to fail, but like, you know what I mean? It turns into like a 50-50 into like, a 25-75.
Yeah. We mentioned this a little bit before in our phone call, but there are times where like you lose in deployment, not because they did a thing, but you specifically put your pieces in situations where they couldn't do the thing that they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That part of the game is really important.
Yeah, that part of the game is massive. And that brings us to the next part where it's talking about specifically like buff characters, wizards, priests, places of power. So these are all things that you have to be thinking of because they all have effective ranges when it comes to the thing they want to do. All wizards have a spell. That spell has a distance. Most of the time, if it's affecting a friendly unit, it's wholly within. And if it's affecting an enemy unit, it's usually within. But like those ranges got smaller. And like where you deploy your stuff, if you want to get that off turn one, is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like Seraphon have a run and charge ability. If I want to use that turn one,
speed of Huan Chi.
Yes, speed of Huan Chi. If I want to use that turn one, they got to be close to the dude who's casting it. You know what I mean? So you want to like put your. Not only do you want to think about the points, like you want to put your guys in specific positions so that they can score those points and stand on those circles and get those battle tactics turn one.
Mm-hmm.
But you also want to be putting them in the auras of your heroes that buff, your heroes that cast spells, the heroes that get you things. Potentially, you want to put your wizard in a spot where they could like move onto a place of power or get the place of power turn one.
Mm-hmm. There's also like like guarded hero blocking and things like that. You need to keep it,
100%. Yeah, that there's a lot of lists right now are very, very popular with having one reinforced unit that is good at shooting, and they're getting like pluses to hit, pluses to wound against the enemy general's regiment, as well as they're going to be spamming that one command point shoot in the enemy hero shooting phase or the enemy shooting phase.
Yeah, covering fire.
It's just good. Covering fire because it's just good. You know what I mean? So like shooting is definitely something you kind of want to think about when you put your little hero down and you accidentally put him in range of something. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Skrygot's been shot many times by long strikes.
Yeah, it feels so bad when you put something in a position where and then it dies or doesn't do the thing that it's supposed to do, and you're like, I literally could have avoided this if I just put things down on the board better.
Yeah.
It goes back to the whole like set up a game against yourself, as dumb as it sounds, but like if you don't think about that in that kind of way, because like your opponent has but until they roll the dice to unbind your spells, they have no interaction with like whatever you're doing. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like if you don't set the stuff up to get the buff or to be in a position to like be affected by the things that you brought, then that's on you. You know what I mean? That's a lose in deployment, in my opinion.
Yeah. To correct myself, you definitely can lose in deployment. Yeah. Like it's like I'm not. I was trying.
I put all my heroes up front and all my chaff behind them.
You can definitely like not screen. Like if you don't put screens up for Iron Jaws or you don't deploy back, you're going to get rolled over because that's what they want to do. You know.
Yep. Yeah. Speaking of, like, I kind of think of offense or deployment styles sort of in kind of three categories where it's like offensive, defensive, and then like flexible. Mm-hmm. So that brings me into like if you're going against someone who might be better at you at like charging and fighting, you know what I mean, like Varangard or someone with a 3d6 or someone with insane attacks like brutes, you know, you got to start thinking about like how do I do the condition that we already talked about where I'm standing on points and I'm in range of all of my buffs, but also now I'm taking like a much more defensive, like how do I put my stuff on the board and stay safe? So, I mean, you don't have to worry about that so much because you have Trogs, but you've obviously faced Iron Jaws. You've faced like large Varangard.
I faced Khorne Varangard. I faced some of the killiest stuff in the game.
Yeah. What's going through your mind when you're like, we're like putting down our drops right now, and I have to like think about if he wants to turn one, mess me up.
So the thing is with brutes is they don't have good power projection, right? So it's like you kind of can, like they move 5 inches, so it's like you're not going to get turn one charged unless you sprint up into them. Varangard are harder because the thing is they have, I can't remember if it's like demonic speed or something that gives them the 3d6 charge, because it's one of those things that they're really going to get where they want to go. So you just have to clog lanes, right? And it's like my whole goal, my whole plan is I want like their hammers to be fighting Trogs. That's my goal the whole time, because I'm gumming them up. I can collapse around them and then squash them, and then I can regenerate Trogs, right? So that's kind of my goal. Like if they're fighting like Trogs and not heroes, then I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, because I can't stop them, right? Like they're going to run in regardless. Yeah. And a lot of times Varangard have like Be'lakor gives them a 4-up fight first. So even if you charge them, they're fighting
doing their stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. They don't get like the bonuses from the charge, but they're still very, very, killing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, yeah. So I think legitimately when you're thinking about your opponent's deployment, you need to look at how they deploy and like what they're clearly looking to do turn one, right? Their battle tactic, their win conditions. Yeah. And that kind of pulls me into like, not only do you need to understand their win conditions, you need to understand your win conditions, right? Like I know you need to know what your army does well, and you need to be able to like not bait them into that game, but like force them to play that game in some facet, right?
I mean, if you put Trogs on objectives, they have to come.
Agreed. Yeah, my whole goal of my army is to sprint my Trogs in the middle and then just create like essentially like a mud pit. You know what I mean? That's like you're fighting me on the mud pit that I want to fight on. Yeah.
One of the things that like I've lost a lot in the past, especially using Storm Drake Guard as dragons, is I wanted them to be a thing, and that was like a lance that reached out and like took off units off the board, right? Even in like a 4-stack, even reinforced. They didn't really do that. It's not really their thing. What they do is they move 12 inches and fly and have a once per game reroll charges.
It count as 10 on objectives.
Count as 10 on objectives. So like what they should have been was something running around the battlefield, and like how you said your gameplay was get everything in the middle and start gumming everything up. My gameplay should have been bait them in and then run around them. Like,
because I can't catch you. I literally can't catch you.
The games that I have won were like that, where it's like they came to the objectives, I went to their objectives, they couldn't come back to their like my objectives, but I could come back to mine. You know what I mean? Like they couldn't go back into their territory because they just didn't have the movement, but I did. So once I secured that area, I could circle back and start working that way.
Yeah, and like understand, like you're playing me, like that's my weakness. My weakness is movement. The things that can move and catch you aren't scary. So understanding that, like a lot of times, like Lumineth is a very like castle-y army. You know what I mean? Unless you're playing the Foxes, in which case they're just gonna run up, sit in your pants, and shoot you in the face. There's a lot of different armies that play different games. Tzeentch is also very castle-y and buffy,
Yep.
And
there's a lot of armies in the game that they want to sit in a like roughly half board sized defensive castle, put every buff that they can on themselves, and then just kind of like march them forward and like sit there and like potentially have units like running around doing stuff like scoring battle attacks and whatnot. But they want to be kind of like baiting like one hammer at a time into you and that kind of thing.
So a perfect game for this is I played the guy that won ACO this year, right? Mike, great guy. He played the most techie game of like Beastclaw Raiders I've ever seen in my entire life. He has 4 Stonehorns and 2 of the like elephant ones. I can't remember what they're called. But he has literally 6 models. All of them are giant beasts with wards, and he's playing monster trucks. Instead of just rolling over me turn 1, we did this thing where we kind of like, he used them as really good movement pieces, and he's coming one way, I'm going the other way because we're playing Meltwater, and he doesn't want to get stuck in the middle of Trogs because he doesn't have I have pieces that I can teleport around the board to steal points. He doesn't, so he's like very smartly only touching the points he needs to and moving into my zone when he wants to move into my zone. And I got caught out, and I ended up losing that game because I touched a point that I wasn't supposed to too early, and I just couldn't get past his wall,
That is a good point. Like a lot of, I think the turn 1 charge alpha strike lists are not as big as they used to be, or especially like in 40k. 40k, you kind of you always want to alpha strike because you have a much more touch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And Stormcast really don't fall from the sky anymore. It at least offensively, you have to do it tactically. You know what I mean?
You're going to steal points. That's all you're doing.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into the like flexible build, like flexible deployment style. That's something that as a Stormcast player, I'm very, very used to, where I'm going to put my long strikes that when they used to have 30-inch range, I'm going to put them in a place where I'm going to move my 5 inches and then I'm going to shoot you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to put them on the line if I'm not afraid of being charged or anything like that. And I think you're going to make me go first. I'm going to put them somewhere where if you make me go first, the first thing I'm doing in my hero fetish, like in last edition, is shooting, you know, and then I'm going to move and shoot again. And that can be like very, very scary. But if they start like putting things to kind of like on the board to support some other stuff somewhere else, like I'm going to start putting things in other directions, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, I'm going back and forth with my opponent, like waiting to see what they do, where their big stuff is. And then I'm kind of trying to like be flexible with how I want my stuff to go. But that's like a very dangerous game. Sometimes you can just get caught out and you're just like, oh, well, I didn't expect that. And now I'm here and I'm stuck. I'm, knee deep in trogs. But it's definitely something to think about. If you are like, they're a 3-drop, you're a 3-drop, you're both sitting there like deploying. You want to kind of like have, this was easier in 3rd edition, but in 4th edition, you want to kind of build your list so that like your 2 drops are in a distinct drop pattern where they have like maybe you drop one consistently first so that you don't show your hand, and then you have the other one that after they've dropped their thing, you can drop your thing. We'll talk about like offensive kind of drop styles, but I do want to go back to the drop off a little bit, because even though it's minimized in this edition, it's still something that you kind of have to be aware of and something that you have to like play too. So like an offensive style of list would be something like you said, with the Kragnos, with the Ironjaws, with the Varangard, with the Bellicors, Eels, you know what I mean? Like anything that's like fast, punchy.
It gets to choose its engagement, right? Like it's
exactly.
Like there are things that do that. Like Eels are hitty, not as hitty as a lot of things, but they will always choose their engagement. You know what I mean? Yeah. Eels should never be charged, unless they're already in combat. But Varangard are kind of the same thing, where they're like so fast that they really should be choosing their engagement. Yeah. Or, so you need to plan for that stuff.
Yeah, the offensive, like, and like it's not, Lord of the Rings cinematic where like everything is charging down and running into a shield wall. You know what I mean? That's that's not what is going on.
Not a lot of shield walls.
Yeah.
Not a lot of shield.
You're like, the offense is probably like, okay, well, they just stuck, a reinforced unit of Varangard plus like a buff hero on this flank. I kind of know what they want to do. They want to run to my objective on the other side.
Yeah, that's their strong side.
Absolutely, like put their stuff there. But yeah, that's. Do you want to talk about strong side versus weak side, or do you want to talk about drops?
So we talked about so far is understanding battle tactics, understanding primaries, what you need to do to score, understanding your opponent's strengths and threat ranges, understanding your strengths and threat ranges, and now we can kind of talk about like a lot of times the game, at least I've seen, Kyle, and I don't have statistics to back this up, but at least when I've been playing 2,000-point games, there's a lot less units than I remember there being. Like I think things have generally got more expensive. So it's
I think 4th has made it very advantageous to reinforce certain units and to have like much smaller units to run around the board and do things. So I think it definitely feels that way.
Yeah, I think it's like you'll see lists between like 4 and 10 units, and like that's generally.
There's also no battle line requirement. So like a lot of lists would just have 3 like units of
80-point battle
screens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whatever you can bring to fill the slot.
Yeah. So without that, everyone can invest in the things that they want, which is they usually have like hammers. They usually have some kind of
Anvil.
point scorers and then like some big heroes.
Yeah. I think that understanding when, like, because a lot of times you only get one squad of 6 Iron Guard or, like, you know, one squad of 10 brutes, like, understanding where those power pieces are and where you kind of like, you're like, oh, it's brutes, right? Brutes are terrifying, but they only move 5 inches, right?
Mhm.
And they can mighty destroyers, so they can get a little bit extra movement in there, but like that's not, they're not getting into your zone turn 1 or turn 2. So
Yeah.
when you see them go down, you understand like, hey, that's where they're committing a large chunk of their killing power. I want to make sure that I'm playing on the other side of the board. I have something
Yeah.
that can catch that or slow that down, or maybe I can go engage that when I choose to. But like, if I don't play well into that and I don't shoot, like I don't want to just face check and fight that and try to win that fight. There's a lot of other ways to win. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
frequently in a lot of very competitive games, you do the whole like, listen, my strong side is my left side, your strong side is your left side, and we just
Mhm.
go like that, you know,
Yep.
and we switch objective sides, or we do
Yeah.
like, you know, that happens all the time.
And because that's what's smart. I like a quote from Sun Tzu is the way of war is to avoid what is strong and strike what is weak.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It
Win
works.
fights, don't lose them. Yeah.
There's a reason they like a lot of people do that. It works.
Yeah.
If you have a stronger force and you're fighting a weaker force, you're going to win that battle. Like basically guaranteed.
Agreed. And you're trying to take things off their board so they can't score points, right? Like if you take their weak side and they don't take your strong side as effectively as you take their weak side, you're winning the game. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like without even fighting the brutes.
Yeah.
So
that's a really good point. Is like a lot of, again, like fast hammer units, dragons, agrodons, their goal is not to jump in and like fight the
strongest
big
thing. Yeah.
the strongest thing, because like then you're kind of trading a queen for a queen, you know, unless like there's a situation where it's obvious that you're going to do that. A lot of times they're going to be running down smaller units and, like you said, removing pieces from the board so they can't score points either through primary or through battle tactics.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have, there's a lot of battle tactics in the game that require 2 units. If you don't have 2 units that are in position to do it, can't do it.
Yeah,
You know?
that's honestly one of the biggest proponents for like take their flanks turn 1 is it's so hard to have 2 units in place to do that.
Yeah.
Like turn 1 is really kind of like your prime time, unless you're like a very teleporty army or very fast. Like it's going to be hard to do that.
Yeah. And kind of to bounce off like the strong and weak side is to circle back to something where it's the drop off. So it's very advantageous to have 2 drops. If you can have 2 drops, you at least get a roll off. Because I think outside of like some potential list to be a 1 drop,
I've seen one.
Almost.
I fought
You've
one.
seen one?
I fought one. It was
Nice.
a Slaves Darkness list because they're very point expensive.
Yeah,
and
true.
You can get 5 units in a list, you know, or like 5 units in a list and get close to 2K.
Yeah.
So it's very unlikely. Again, exactly what you're saying. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
But it's one of those things that, like, if I'm being honest, I don't even really play the drop game anymore. I kind of just like, because like going second, like getting the double turn isn't like, it's good, and I've done it, and there's definitely points where it's like impactful.
Yeah.
But it is you have to be somewhat comfortable in the game to do it, you know?
Yeah. It shifted from, and I think this was the whole point, was with them trying to keep the double turn in the game. I remember when it was confirmed that double turn was still in the game, everyone was kind of like, why? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But they wanted to keep it in the game because it is a choice, but they actually made it a choice.
Yeah,
like,
it's a trade.
You used to just take it 100% because there was no downsides. Now it's like, I don't know if I want to take it. Like, can I? It becomes a general question where it's like, do you know enough about your damage output, their damage output, to double turn this person? Did you remove enough pieces so they don't win by 4? You know?
Yeah.
So it's much more of a choice in this edition, which is really, really nice. But it's definitely one of those things where like I don't necessarily think of it as we are gunning. Like I still am building like 2-drop and 3-drop lists because I still think that the choice is very important. You know what I mean? Like going first.
When you get the choice, it's really nice.
Yeah, if you get the choice, it's like a great added benefit. But I do think that like you said, if you just come expecting to go second,
Always.
you're going to have a good time because you either get the thing that you wanted or you always know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Regardless.
Yeah. And like, honestly, going first isn't bad anymore. You know what I mean? Because double turning isn't as, I don't think it's as strong because the game's not as killy. It's killy. It's not as killy. Like, it was crazy before.
It was crazy before. Anything could kill anything. Everything in the game was 3s, -1 damage. You know what I mean? Like,
so, I think right now it's much more like it's not like the game isn't as killy, so you can't like completely cripple your opponent in one turn as much.
Yeah,
you can, not as much.
Not as much.
So and the trade off of points is massive. So I think it's like I don't care if I go first, and a lot of times I choose to go first because then I can get all my buffs off. You know what I mean? Like I get my spells out there. I get my like. You know, I get to interact with you a turn, or like assure that I'm going to max score one turn without any interaction from you if I don't get too close. You know,
yeah. The like when I'm thinking of the drop game, I'm more specifically thinking about like deploying your army with vision in the sense that like if they are, let's say they are a 1-drop, they deploy their entire army, and then you get to deploy your entire army like in response, basically. So that's something to think about when you are dropping. And like, if you know you're going to lose the drop game, just use the deployment ability that lets you set up a unit and just like do that 3 times. They have set up their whole army. You've deployed 3 units from one regiment. And then you get to deploy your whole other like the rest of your army in knowing what's going on. Knowing what that strong side is,
like if he's coming, if the other guy's coming to the table with 2 drops or 1 drop, and I have a 3-drop, I'm just going to throw okay, screening unit, okay, single hero,
that also kind of goes back into the list building of like, hey, maybe don't like if you are doing this, like maybe like think about what is the regiment because you do have to deploy all of the units from one specific regiment. So like think about that. You know what I mean? Like. You don't want to drop the wrong things in the wrong areas if you like have a choice, basically.
Can you like break up a regiment though? Can you be like, hey, I'm using deploy unit and I'm deployed like you deploy one, like if you set your list right, and I have 4 regiment or 3 regiments, right?
Yep.
And you have 2, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to win the drop game. Like I can take one of my regiments and just break it into 2 drops. No. Okay, cool.
If you use the deploy unit ability. You have to use the deploy unit ability until you run out of units in that regiment.
So I'm deploying from the same regiment though.
Yes.
So I can deploy them one at a time from the same regiment.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, got it. So basically you put down like your Kroxigor regiment, and then I'm like, okay, like my one regiment has Trug and Spider Riders. I deploy the Spider Riders, and then I stop. And then you deploy the rest of your army, and then I deploy Trug, and then I stop. And then I deploy the rest of my army. Got it. Okay, that's cool. I like that.
But yeah, that lets you see like their strong side and their weak side, and then you can kind of plan accordingly. You can see like what's on the line, where are they going? They're probably going to objective. They're probably going to a battle tactic. You know, kind of get into their head and start thinking about what their turn 1 is going to look like.
Yeah,
and trying to make it advantageous for you to do the thing that you want to do. And that kind of comes into the threat range where like there's a sort of ebb and flow when it comes to movement, because you want to move forward, but you want to move forward in a way where when they move forward, their charge is much more difficult. So that's obviously like hard to do without showing it. But sometimes you just can't do that. You know what I mean? But like, or you put yourself in a position when they move up to do their thing, you have a very easy move charge to do their thing.
Yeah.
Put
yourself in a position to score. You need to understand that, again, like similar to the last video, you got to have 6 or 7 battle tactics in your back pocket that you're comfortable doing with your list. And you need to know when to put yourself in the position. Like you want to take the ones that have the most conditions first. You need to get them out. You know what I mean? And then it's like, okay, like you want to do the easier, take their land, you know, slay the entourage. You want to be doing that like later in the game when there's less opportunities to do everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, another thing to think about, like deployment, is, and this kind of goes back into getting off your buffs with your wizards, knowing where their wizards are, because it's 24 inches for unbind, 30 inches for unbind, 30
and not visible, so the visibility doesn't matter. Yeah.
30 and not visible. I always forget if it's 24 or 30 for whatever
30.
reason. I don't know why. But yeah, no, the 30 inches is very long and not visible. So like they can be anywhere, you know what I mean? But it is possible to deploy, if they deploy their wizard in a way and you deploy your wizard in a way, you could just not unbind turn one, you know?
Yeah.
I've definitely been in positions where I put my wizard in a specific spot to do a thing. I look across the board, I measure, I'm like, oh, if you go turn one, I don't get to unbind anything. That feels bad. You know what I mean?
Because they just get all their magic off uninterrupted. And then they move forward, and now you can't do the same thing.
Yeah. So think about that, where they're like, are your spells more important? Are their spells more important? Can you deploy in a position where you can't get unbound but still get your buffs off? You know, okay, do you have a like hero that either gets buffs naturally or a wizard that gets buffs naturally or can stand next to a place of power turn one and then just start like cranking out endless spells? So these are all just like things that you need to kind of be in your head and like be thinking about, because you want, obviously, like you want to do all the things we've talked about at the same time in that short thing of like, okay, where do you put that unit? You know what I mean? I think that's the thing that like trips me up the most when it comes to deployment phases. I'm just kind of like, oh, we're having a good time. I'm having a good thing. Like, oh, I'm thinking, you know, but the game hasn't started yet. So I'm just kind of putting my stuff on the board. You know what I mean? I'm putting them like around where
You're just
I
putting
want
models
them.
down. Yeah.
I'm just putting models down. And then like I start measuring shit and I'm just like, oh, I didn't put them in positions, or now he has to spend a command point and run here to like even score me a battle tactic. You know what I mean? You just got to be very thinky. Like that's if you're going to use all your brain power in a game, deployment phase is where you want to use all your brain power.
Yeah.
It's super important.
Highly impactful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think. The other thing that I wanted to mention was combat range is 6 inches now.
Yeah.
Like,
well, threat range when in combat.
Yeah. Threat range when in combat is 6 inches. Always remember that when you're setting up a screen. Like if you're setting up a screen in deployment, in like to say like, oh, what if they have something that deep strikes turn one, or like hand of Gorks across the board turn one, or something like that. If that happens, or they have a pregame move like flies or something like that, you know, they can pile in 3 and then their range is 3. Mm-hmm. So basically, if you have a unit, endless spell, terrain feature that's there and they charge it, they can then pile it around and then fight 3. So like your stuff isn't as safe as you think if they're like too close. So that's something to think when you're deploying, especially against an army that's going to be trying to deep strike you and trying to like gum you up or deploy on your flanks and that kind of stuff. Come in for reserve, you know, hole it up. Something to think about.
Yeah, something to understand, because it's 100%. We played a game. I piled around your warriors and tagged your Croc score. So it's like they're not getting in. They're not getting. I don't think they get charge buffs, but like they're not getting charge buffs. They're not getting charged. You know what I mean? So like a lot of the efficiencies that you were kind of like hoping for, like if you wanted to move them around so they can all get in, like not there. You know?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some other stuff for deployment phase specifically, besides like, if you haven't watched, I made a short video about the deployment phase talking about the abilities and how the abilities work in it. Understanding that like you're going to deploy all your terrain and then you're going to deploy all your units. And then after everything has been like deployed and on the board, that's when you do like your unit specific deployment phase, as long as it doesn't say to like set up, you know what I mean? So fly, like a subfaction of Nurgle has, okay, in the deployment phase, like after everything's been set up, basically, now you get to pregame move your stuff outside of 9 inches. There's like tons and tons of abilities. Snufflers have it. You know what I mean? Like there's so many of those type of abilities. Stormcast have the designate objective, you know? So even in like, if you're playing the season, the general regiment bonus, like the bodyguard
deployment ability,
the deployment ability, that is in the deployment phase after everything's been set up. So you get to do it in a world of perfect information where you understand what's on the battlefield, where you are, where they are, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So just something to think about when it comes to the deployment phase, because it has changed a decent bit from 3rd edition.
Yeah, there's a lot more steps to it.
There's a lot more. It's
very clear, and like I don't think it's very convoluted. but there's more like there's a clear linear step to it, you know?
Yep. Yeah. That's definitely something I want to be. I'd like to get a game in before I go to the tournament.
Oh, we
this
definitely will.
month.
We have like 2 or 3 weeks.
2 or 3 weeks. Yeah.
I mean, I will get a game in with you before then.
Yeah, that's definitely something I need to be thinking about is just how to set up everything so they're within all of the concentric circles that we've talked about.
Mhm.
Battle tactics, battle plan, like secondary, primary, all my buffs, outside of getting gooped by, crazy stuff and then like being in range for things that need to happen.
Yeah. It's there's a lot to understand. We've gone through a lot during the podcast, but it's one of those things that when you're in the thick of it and like looking at the board, it's a lot easier to like intuitively kind of get what you need to be getting,
Mm-hmm.
So it's, take everything with a grain of salt. Let us know like if we missed anything, like if you guys see anything in the deployment phase that you find like crucial or critical or like decisions that you're making that like you kind of want to share. I love talking about that kind of stuff because I feel like not the highest level of skill expression, but a really good example of skill expression in the game. Because we're always trying to get better.
True.
But
you always have something to learn.
Always have something to learn. My biggest thing, my favorite thing about going to big tournaments is I see a lot of lists that I don't normally see, right? Because like I usually we play Wargamers Guild most of the time. You know what I mean? The people that play AOS there play a certain amount of armies. You know what I mean? And I usually see these like between like these 15 armies. You know what I mean? I want to see other things. I want to see other people.
I just want to see other people. Yeah, what I think it's like a Master Yi. Continuing with the League of Legends thing, it's like a Master Yi quote where he's like, "The best teacher is a forever student" or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Never stop learning.
Never stop learning. Yeah, you always have something to absorb. To kind of touch on one last thing is you were talking about like high skill expression, low combat games. That is something that there's a developer for Riot Games that works on League of Legends, and his name's August. He posts a lot of videos on his TikTok just talking about stuff. And one of the things was how different games are at low-E, like professional versus like your average solo queue, because like when you get to that level, you understand that you can absolutely win the game of League of Legends and never get into combat.
Yeah.
And like Sigmar is 100% the same, where it's like you can basically just outposition your opponent until they like you are so stacked that they can't even like do anything against you. And it's kind of the same thing with the points, you know what I mean, where you're positioning yourself in ways where you're scoring so many points and they're not, because they're
you're
not
forcing them to
objectives.
respond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like it, like you said with the not gut busters,
rock guts.
No, the man eaters.
Yeah, the man eater. Well, it was like Stonehorns.
Those Stonehorns, with like the Stonehorns list, where it's very like circling. You know what I mean, and like scoring points, but not necessarily just like jumping in and fighting everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, that's definitely something that we probably will revisit this at some point in time. But I'd love to hear if we've missed anything, or if there's anything that you guys have seen in your games that you want to talk about.
Let us know. Let us know what you're playing too, because like we've obviously seen a bunch of like videos of like what armies people are playing and stuff. But like I love to hear that like in the throes of a new edition, like what are people trying out?
Mm-hmm.
So
true. But all right, everyone, this has been our podcast. So we'll see you again next time. Thanks, everyone, and have a good one.
See ya.
Peace.